insurance agent wrote off his stormland. He rebuilt the soil in 3 years and doubled his yield. The rain arrived on the 22nd of June, 1989. Darrell Hicks had finished cutting his winter wheat 4 days earlier. All 340 acres in Custer County, Oklahoma, were bare. Harvested stubble, dry soil, nothing holding it down. He was in the equipment shed greasing the header on his Gleaner combine when the sky changed color. By 4 in the afternoon, 2 inches had fallen. By 8, the creek at the south end of his property had run over its banks. The water moved fast across the flat ground, dark red from the clay it was pulling up as it went. Darrell stood on the porch and watched it move in the failing light. It rained until midnight. In the morning he put on his boots and walked the fields. The topsoil was gone, not damaged, not reduced. Gone from 180 of his 340 acres. The west section and the south section, both of them dead flat and recently harvested, had shed their topsoil like a skin. What sat beneath was red clay, the color of old brick, cracked at the surface, as hard as compressed chalk. The water had moved the sandy loam off in sheets and deposited it somewhere downstream. Some of the gully marks were 8 inches deep. Darrell stood in the middle of the west field for a long time. He was 54 years old. He had farmed this land for 26 years. His father had farmed it for 19 years before that. The loam that had just moved was not something deposited in a season. It was organic matter and microbial life, built over decades of stubble incorporation and careful management. He knew exactly what red clay did to wheat. He walked back to the house, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table without drinking it. The fencing repairs alone would cost around $3,800. He estimated that before the insurance call. 3 fence lines had gone under, and 1 post section on the north boundary had been carried 40 yards down the drainage channel. The call to his agent at Mid-Continent Insurance came that afternoon. The adjuster assigned to the claim was a man named Gerald Mast, based in Weatherford. Gerald arrived 3 days later in a clean white Chevrolet. He carried a clipboard and a 35mm camera. He walked the field slowly. He photographed the clay exposure, the gully marks, the section where the loam had piled against the fence line before the fence had given way. He worked methodically and quietly and wrote 8 pages of notes. Darrell walked with him, but did not say much. When they were finished, they sat at the kitchen table. Gerald went through the findings in order. The fencing was covered. Minor structural damage to the grain storage shed at the Southfield boundary was covered. Equipment inside the shed at the time of the event, covered. The soil degradation, Gerald explained, was a separate category. Erosion loss was classified as an event-aggravated condition under the terms of the policy. The policy covered crop loss and property damage. Soil as a physical asset and its productive capacity was not a compensable item. Settlement offer for all covered items, $9,400. Gerald recommended resting the ground for a full season. He said the clay would stabilize once vegetation re-established naturally. He said that process usually took 4 to 6 years. He left his card on the kitchen table. Darrell looked at it for a while. He set it near the phone. The operating loan at First National Bank in Clinton for the 1989-1990 crop year was $41,000. It had been signed in March, before the storm, and it was based on projected production from 340 productive acres. Darrell drove to Clinton in August and told them what had happened. He brought photographs. The loan officer, Harold Eck, had been at First National 17 years. He asked measured questions and wrote down the answers. He told Darrell the loan terms would hold, but that the bank would want to see yield documentation from the fall harvest. Darrell planted winter wheat on all 340 acres in September of 1989. He had no practical alternative. The loan required a cash crop. He used 90 pounds of seed per acre and applied 65 units of nitrogen fertilizer across the damaged sections, heavier than his usual rate, trying to compensate for what the soil had lost. The wheat came up. That part worked. By February of 1990, the problem was visible. The 180 damaged acres were noticeably shorter and thinner than the undamaged sections. The clay subsoil behaved differently from the loam above it. It absorbed water poorly, cracked during dry spells, and shed nitrogen-bearing rainfall before the roots could take it up. The 65 units he had applied were largely gone by March. In a dry April, the damaged sections began to show stress first. The June 1990 harvest off the damaged 180 acres came to 16 bushels per acre. The rest of the farm averaged 36. Before the storm, his county average had been 38 across all 340 acres. At $2.85 per bushel, the 1990 harvest grossed $21,280. The loan payment was $41,000. He sat at the kitchen table in July of 1990 with those two numbers in front of him. Harold Eck restructured the loan in August, extended repayment by 16 months, charged a $380 restructuring fee. He did this without much discussion. He had seen it before. Darrell drove out to the Custer County Extension Office in Arapahoe the same week. He talked to the extension agent there, Phil Connors, who had run that office for 12 years. Phil walked Darrell through the standard options for degraded soils: heavy nitrogen application, deep tillage to fracture the clay subsoil and improve drainage, lime application to adjust pH. Darrell had tried the heavy nitrogen. It had not held. Phil said the clay subsoil would respond over time with consistent management. 4 to 6 years of good practice and the ground would start to produce. He said it the way a man says something he believes but cannot prove. On his way out, Darrell pulled 4 brochures from the rack near the door. He took them without looking at them closely. Drove home. That evening he read them at the kitchen table. 3 of them covered wheat variety selection and chemical weed management. The 4th was a 1988 Oklahoma State University bulletin on cover crop rotations for soil organic matter restoration in degraded dryland wheat ground. He read it twice. The bulletin was written by a soil science extension specialist in Stillwater. It described using leguminous cover crops, primarily crimson clover and hairy vetch, to fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil. It described cereal rye as a companion species that prevented erosion during the cover period and added organic residue when it decomposed. It included a chart showing the relationship between soil organic matter percentage and a soil's ability to retain moisture and hold applied nutrients. The damaged sections of his farm were sitting at an estimated 0.8% organic matter, based on the appearance of the clay and its behavior in moisture. Productive dryland wheat ground in western Oklahoma typically ran between 2.5 and 3.2%. He looked at that chart for a long time. The decision took him 3 days to make. He would not plant a cash wheat crop on the 180 damaged acres in the fall of 1990. He would plant a cover crop instead. 1 full season of no revenue from those fields. He would plant wheat normally on the undamaged 160 acres to maintain some cash flow. He drove back to Clinton and told Harold Eck. Harold asked how long. Darrell said 1 winter. The cover crop would go in September and come down in April. He would plant wheat into the residue in September of 1991. Harold looked at the OSU bulletin Darrell had brought with him. He looked at it for a while. He modified the loan terms again. Restructured for an additional 14 months. Charged a second fee of $280. Cover crop seed for 180 acres cost $260. The mix was 15 pounds per acre of crimson clover and 25 pounds per acre of cereal rye. Darrell drilled it in mid-September of 1990 using his 20-foot wheat drill. Same equipment, different seed, different purpose. By mid-October, the rye had established a dense green stand. Crimson clover lagged behind, but was visible through November. In December, a 3-inch rain event moved through the county. The rye held the ground completely. On the neighboring properties, bare wheat stubble fields showed mild rill erosion after that storm. Darrell's covered 180 acres showed none. He noted that, said nothing about it to anyone. Lonnie Fraser, who farmed 280 acres on the east side of the county road, stopped his truck at Darrell's field gate one Saturday morning in November. He looked at the green cover on the field for a minute without getting out of the truck. He drove on. In April of 1991, Darrell rolled the cover crop down using a rented 15-foot roller crimper from the county implement dealer in Weatherford. He had never used a roller crimper before. The rental cost $85 per day. He finished the 180 acres in 2 days. The rolled residue lay flat on the field's surface, a dense tan mat of crimson clover and cereal rye, roughly 4 inches thick. The clay soil beneath it was already darker than it had been the year before. Decomposing root mass from the rye had added something visible to the surface inch of soil. He did not plow it in. He drilled the second cover crop directly through the rolled residue in September of 1991. The second mix was different. In August of 1991, Darrell drove to Stillwater and met with Dr. Margaret Helton, a soil science researcher in the agronomy department at Oklahoma State. He had written ahead and brought field notes, his soil appearance observations, and the 1988 bulletin. Dr. Helton was 41 years old. She had been working on dryland soil restoration research for 9 years. She adjusted his prescription. The new mix, 40 pounds per acre of oats, 12 pounds per acre of hairy vetch, and 4 pounds per acre of tillage radishes. The radishes were the part he hadn't encountered before. The tillage radish grew a taproot that reached 14 to 22 inches into the soil profile, depending on conditions. In the clay subsoil of his damaged fields, those taproots would fracture compaction layers and deposit organic matter below the surface. When the radishes winter-killed in late December, the taproots would decompose in place, leaving open channels through the clay. Those channels improved water infiltration and allowed future crop roots to penetrate deeper. The oats added surface biomass. The vetch fixed additional nitrogen. Radish seed cost 3.60 cents per pound. Total cost for 180 acres, $2,592. He ordered from a seed supplier in Wichita. The cover crop drilled in the second week of September 1991. Oats and vetch established quickly. Radish germinated within 10 days and grew fast. By November, the radish tops were 8 inches across, and the root crowns were visible at the soil surface, the size of a clenched fist. In the last week of November, Darrell started hauling manure. Roy Callahan ran a 420-head stocker cattle operation 4 miles east on the same county road. He had 3 winters of accumulated manure behind his winter feeding area. It had been building up in a pile 80 yards long and 15 feet high. Roy needed to deal with it. The timing aligned. The arrangement was straightforward. Darrell would haul it himself at his own fuel cost. Roy would provide the manure at no charge. Darrell made 218 trips over 7 weeks using a 4-ton manure spreader pulled by his Massey Ferguson 1155. He spread it approximately 2.5 tons per acre across the 180 acres. Diesel fuel for the hauling and spreading came to $940. The clay ground absorbed it slowly. The manure sat on the rolled rye residue surface through December. Rain in January moved it into contact with the soil. The radish taproots winter-killed in late December, as predicted, leaving the root channels intact and beginning to decompose in place. In February of 1992, Doral walked the 180 acres and looked at the surface soil. The red clay color was still there, but muted. There was a darker cast to the top inch. He dug a small hole with a fence post digger in the southwest corner of the west field. The soil at 6 inches down was different from what he had seen in the clay a year earlier. More friable, less compacted. The smell was different. He sent soil samples to the OSU laboratory in Stillwater the following week. The results came back April 8th, 2 weeks before he intended to plant wheat. Organic matter in the treated 180 acres, 2.2%. 3 years earlier, informal observation had put the damaged ground at 0.8%. 2 full winters of cover crops, 870 tons of hauled cattle manure, and the decomposed radish taproot network had moved the number from 0.8 to 2.2. Productive wheat ground in Custer County ran around 2.6 to 3.0% organic matter. He was close enough. He drilled Chisholm hard red winter wheat across all 180 acres in the second week of September 1992. Standard seeding rate, 85 pounds per acre. He applied 45 units of nitrogen per acre, 20 units less than his pre-storm norm, because the cover crop legumes and the manure had already loaded the soil with available nitrogen. Applying full rates on top of that would have been wasteful and would have risked nitrogen burn on the germinating seedlings. The wheat emerged in 9 days. Uniform emergence across the entire 180 acres. Every row. By mid-October, the stand looked different from anything he had grown on those fields before. The plants were thicker at the stem. The leaf color was a deeper green than the adjacent undamaged sections planted under his normal program. He walked rows and looked at individual plants. The root systems he pulled were noticeably longer. The radish channels had given them somewhere to go. By February of 1993, you could see the difference from the county road. Phil Connors drove past in March on his way to a different farm call. He slowed down on the road, visible from Daryl's kitchen window. He didn't turn in. Daryl began cutting the rebuilt 180 acres on June 11, 1993. He watched the monitor on his gleaner through the first 3 passes on the west field. The rebuilt sections averaged 81 bushels per acre. He cut the undamaged 160 acres over the following 2 days. Those sections, farmed under his conventional program without interruption, averaged 72 bushels per acre. The damaged ground, the ground Gerald Mast had assessed as a non-compensable loss, was producing 9 bushels per acre more than the ground that had never been damaged. Custer County average for winter wheat in 1993, 44 bushels per acre. In 1990, the same 180 acres had produced 16 bushels per acre. In 1993, they produced 81. At $3.15 per bushel, the rebuilt sections grossed $45,927 from ground that 4 years earlier had not covered its seed cost. Phil Connors stopped by in July of 1993. He had a clipboard and a camera. He asked to walk the fields. Daryl walked with him. Phil asked about the cover crop sequence, the manure application rate, the Roller-Crimper method, and the reduced nitrogen rate in year 3. He wrote things down carefully. He didn't mention the 4 to 6 year natural recovery estimate he had given in 1990. He said he found the results interesting. He said he'd be in touch. An extension publication came out in April of 1994. It was a technical bulletin on organic matter restoration methods for eroded dryland wheat ground in western Oklahoma. The case study in the bulletin described a 180-acre section of degraded clay subsoil in Custer County that had been brought from 0.8% organic matter to 2.2% in 2 growing seasons using a sequential cover crop program and manure incorporation. It listed the cover crop species, the seeding rates, the application tonnage, and the resulting yield improvement. It did not name the farm or the farmer. Anyone in the county who had driven past that field on the county road knew exactly which farm it was. Gerald Mast's son Dennis farmed 520 acres of wheat ground in the northern part of the county. He came by in August of 1993. He said he'd heard some things at the elevator. He asked Darrell to walk him through the cover crop program. Darrell showed him the 1988 OSU Bulletin, the soil test results from April 1992, and the yield records from 1990 through 1993. He had kept them in a spiral notebook. Dennis looked at the numbers for a while. Dennis Mast planted crimson clover and cereal rye on 140 of his acres that September. 3 other operators in the county started cover crop programs by 1995. Word moved the way it moved in that part of Oklahoma, at the grain elevator scale line, at the Weatherford Highway calf, at the fence line when 2 men happened to stop at the same time. Darrell did not consider himself a demonstrator of anything. He had a problem. He found a method that addressed it. He applied the method, and it worked. That was the sum of it. By 2001, soil tests across all 340 acres of his operation averaged 2.8% organic matter. The 180 acres originally damaged in the 1989 storm, 12 years later tested at 3.1%. Higher than the undamaged sections, higher than county average. Gerald Mast retired from Mid-Continent Insurance in 1997. Darrell never called the number on the business card. Darrell Hicks farmed the same land in Custer County until 2010. Retired at 75. He sold the operation that spring to a couple from Elk City looking to expand their dryland wheat acreage. Before he left the property, he walked them through the spiral notebook he had kept since 1989. 21 years of soil test results, cover crop records, yield data, and input costs, organized by section and year. The couple kept the notebook. In 2013, one of them stopped Darrell at the elevator in Weatherford and told him the rebuilt sections were still running 3.0% organic matter, still producing above county average. They were continuing the cover crop rotations on those acres. Darrell said that was good to hear. He went home. The 180 acres that the insurance policy had classified as unrecoverable were still working. 24 years after the storm had taken the loam, the soil was better than it had been the morning before the rain started. Built back from 0.8% to over 3.0. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. 3 years to rebuild what one night had taken. Still holding.